Ordinary people in Britain seriously need to wake up to the fact that we are being captured by an ever-increasing number of hardline communist organisations that are becoming more and more emboldened by the day. Just Stop Oil have long marched alongside communist groups. Communist organisations are behind these student pro-Palestine protests taking place at the moment. There is a huge crossover between communist groups and the wider pro-Palestine movement. There was a communist member of SAGE who said that she wanted government restrictions on our day-to-day lives to last forever. The head of the National Education Union has attended the Socialist Workers Marxist Conference. We have communist and radical left-wing groups organising mobile mobs to prevent the Home Office from taking people out of migrant hotels. This network is the Anti-Raids Coalition. They work hand in hand with organisations like Black Lives Matter, which has openly published a Marxist manifesto. It is time to prescribe the radical far left as the extremist groups they really are, and they should be made to pay for the damage they cause. We have been too complacent for too long in Britain, and it is time to say enough is enough. The anti-extremism czar, Lord Wolney, has said this.
These organisations have not yet been judged to meet the terrorist threshold, which is clearly defined and the Home Secretary has to rule on. But there is that space where if organisations are clearly using criminal tactics, they are not being deterred by the individual offences that activists are being charged with. But prescription has worked in the terrorist context to be able to restrict the activities of certain organisations. Okay. It's not perfect, but it can be an important tool.
If they are prescribed as extremists, then the police can actually step in and arrest them. This weekend saw more calls for intifada on the streets. And we've got police who feel too scared to act, but who will arrest individuals if they push somebody back after being shoved themselves by hardline members of the pro-Palestine brigade.
You got a problem, you got asylum here. You take benefit here. There's one challenge.
Like a scene out of 1930s Germany, ordinary Jewish people who wanted to attend a Jewish film festival in Hampstead were greeted by people who turned up and started chanting about resistance.
1, 2, 3, 4, occupation no more. 5, 6, 7, 8, Israel is a terrorist state. 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 Israel is a terrorist state.
MPs even have fake dead babies put on their office steps, like Siobhan Bailey in Gloucestershire. Taxpayers have to fork out an extra £31 million for bodyguards and protective equipment for MPs, some of whom are wearing stab vests. But it's more than that. They're impacting people's lives, stopping ambulances, taking up police time, causing criminal damage, ruining businesses, preventing students from going to lectures. Britain has been too complacent. Whilst people have been sitting around, drinking Chablis and moaning around Brexit, the radical socialists and the communists have been organising and mobilising, and they are not going to simply just grow out of their ideology. They are here for revolution, and we need to wake up to that. Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. I am joined by Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Carol, I'll start with you on this. We've been too complacent for too long in Britain, and we have been infiltrated.
Completely. On the first thing, we've been too complacent. Yeah, we see cops every week at these pro-Palestinian demos. Let's just point out there have now been 1,000 protests and vigils in recent months. It's cost £40 million, 55,000 police officer shifts, and yet they stand there, the cops, and they do nothing while all this goes on. You hear people shouting for intifada, you hear, death, all these awful chants, and they're doing nothing, and they're encouraged to do nothing. And the same thing happens with Just Stop Oil. Even if you manage to get them to court, which is rare, they get a smack on the wrist from the magistrate or the judge or wherever. I think it's a great idea if we now start making them pay for the damage they cause, because for then, a few days in jail, a few weeks in jail is actually a badge of honour. So that's good for them. But what would not be good for them if they have to sell their house to pay for the damage that they've caused to buildings and people.
Yeah, Benjamin, you know, the communists have actually just been on the march whilst we've been asleep, no?
I mean, no, it's just absurd. Look, first of all, I think the idea that they should be prescribed as a terrorist group would undermine the real terrorist organisations that are doing terrible work. The idea that we don't prescribe supporters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but we would somebody that thinks we need to cut our carbon emissions, I think would be a total insult and a misuse of state power.
Can I just say, I agree with you about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but what I would say is, does that person just want to cut carbon emissions, or are they also a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party?
Well, I'm sure there are people that sit in both camps, but that's called free speech and a right to protest. No, and I think we cut down on that at our risk.
What's not free speech is when you damage things, when you damage buildings, when you damage works of art, when you stop people getting to hospital by blocking emergency services. That's their criminal offences.
And that I agree with. So I would make the point that given there are examples, including anti-Semitism at some of these protests, that are already illegal and the police are not enforcing the law, I think the government would do a better job to focus on the officers on the beat doing the laws that exist than doing this kind of posturing.
Should we make them pay for the damage and disruption, Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely we should. I've been absolutely disgusted, I think, as most right-thinking people, when you see them desecrating paintings, throwing paint, smashing windows in buildings. I mean, this is astronomically awful. And worse, of course, it ups insurance premiums for the rest of us law-abiding citizens too. It might seem like a minor point, but actually that is critical. They just can't do these things. And Carol mentioned stopping ambulances. That day when Just Stop Oil refused to let ambulances through to hospital was, I think, a low point.
And then lied about it.
But this is nothing new. Black Lives Matter. Hugely communist organisation. Some of us were always saying that. Look at what they stand for. They're communist.
They put a manifesto out there. The manifesto was out there.
It was out there for anyone with half a brain to Google and look at. And yet they were absolutely lauded.
Point out as well that, you know, these pro-Palestinian protests, a couple of years ago, you know, anti-Semitism was quite rightly seen on our streets as heinous. These people have actually made that mainstream now. For a lot of people, it's OK to hate Jewish people. Our capital city has become a no-go area for Jewish people at weekends. We've seen what's just happened there at their film festival. Shocking. These protests, you know, when you talk about freedom, they've freedom to protest and all the rest of it. They're not free to actually incite
I think we've been too complacent, Benjamin. We have to have a look at some of the people who have captured certain institutions. Sage had a communist there that was saying that we needed to have government restrictions on our lives on the day-to-day forever. You've got the head of the National Education Union who said some incredibly fruity things, has attended Marxist conferences, etc. These people have been very active whilst we've taken our eye off the ball, and they are there and they are not going away.
Look, I'm not a communist and I don't want communists in charge, but these people have got to those positions legitimately. That trade union is a democratic structure.
9%
and that's a function of a free state. What I would say is I think there is rank hypocrisy from people who are calling for these groups to be terrorist organisations. I'll tell you what, when the farmers went and blocked Parliament Square and stopped people getting through with their tractors in opposition to policies about how farming would do, well, the people that would have a problem with this were celebrating that. When the truckers in Canada blocked the whole city of Ottawa and stopped ambulances getting through and all sorts, you had the anti-COVID squad saying that was fantastic. So you know what? You start to prescribe these groups and cut down on the right to protest at your risk, because there is such hypocrisy.
These protests are achieving nothing.
You can't cut down on protest. I totally agree. I think there is absolutely a place for direct action, but not when you're damaging private property with absolutely no consequences whatsoever. I think we have a highly politicised judiciary now, and I think, as Carol rightly said, this is why people who are causing criminal damage, who in any other context would get a fine at least, if not a criminal record.
This is exactly one of the key points, right? We have these absolute radicals now at universities. I know people will say that they've always been there. I think they're now bolder than they've been in recent times. We've got them in our education system. We've got them at the unions. Again, not exactly a shock, but how emboldened are they now? The judiciary, I really think there is a case to be made for some people who are at least very sympathetic to this lot as well, and we see them now becoming bolder and bolder and bolder, and we forgot the extremism czar, who is finally saying, well, it is within our Home Office's powers to actually do something about this. People might not like to admit it. People like to think, oh, this lot will grow out of it when they buy a house and this, that and the other. I don't want to live in a country where we have to live through these people's mistakes in order to realise how evil and wrong it is.
You know, where are all these people, the pro-Palestinian protesters, where are all the protests against the Chinese, against the Saudis, if they're so, if they're so minded? They don't. This is actually a political protest. This is not about Palestine per se for a lot. This is a political protest. But I find it astonishing now that we have students who are on campuses. You know what I think I'm going to find really interesting in the summer, when the summer break comes, is their devotion to the Palestinian cause going to let them go off on holiday for 10 weeks? I'm suspecting.
I'll tell you how I think that'll end. When actual homeless people move into those camps. And they will not be able to deal with them. They won't like them. It'll be a bit too earthy for them. And then all of a sudden they'll decide that they've got to go home for the holidays.
They will go home.
Benjamin, are you not concerned by the rise of communism now in this country? We're seeing the people who are linked to communist organisations mobilising, stopping government policy, stopping these so-called immigration raids, sitting in front of buses. And ordinary people who sit alongside them do not realise that there is a card-carrying militant communist next to them.
No. And frankly, I think if you claim to believe in free speech, then you should say that your arguments win out, not shutting people down through laws passed in Parliament. I'm far more concerned about people on the far right, like Lee Anderson, than I am people on
far right. Come on,
he's not far
right.
These protests, do you think they should go on indefinitely? How long would you say that these pro-Palestinian protests should go on?
I think there should be much better police, because there's definitely anti-Semitism at them, and that's not acceptable.
But how long?
The thing is,
how long do you think we can have a police force governing them and actually not being able to tackle crime on the streets? So how long? A year, 2 years, 3 years? How long?
Well, the people that oppose the COVID jabs are still going on moaning and protesting.
They're not going on. I'm sorry, they're not taking over the capital city every weekend, but these guys are.
And actually, they never had protests anyway and took over the capital city. Anti-lockdown protesters did, yes, but not anti-vaxxers.
And they did it for a few weeks. This has gone on for months and months, and it's cost.
Can I just ask you, when you bandy around things like Lee Anderson is far right, do you worry that maybe you might be being a bit of a useful idiot to the far left?
No, I don't, because actually I think what Lee Anderson advocates for is dangerous and a threat to this country.
What does he advocate?
And frankly,
what does he advocate?
Well, the kind of rhetoric he says, the kind of language he uses, which I think is akin to racism at times, I believe is dangerous.
And what they're doing,
that's why,
don't
ask me, ask the Prime Minister, he got rid of him.
When they've got coffins with, death to Jews on the street, that's all right.
No, that's despicable and racist.
Okay.
And that's why, as I said, the police should enforce the laws.
All I'm saying is, we have an anti-extremism czar now who is finally saying that Britain needs to wake up, and I would echo that. I would also like to echo that I imagine Lee Anderson would deny that he's a racist.